when we were in the depths of developing Nexus, you made an observation about Swedish serial acquirers. So talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's a relatively new, I wouldn't call it an industry because they can be within
Mm.
multiple industries and much of them actually are. But I suppose a relatively new cohort of stocks to me. But I was just shocked at how successful they've been and the track record
Mm.
there and how many serious big winners come from this little kind of, I don't know, type of stock, we'll say. So like
Yeah.
as investors, and Wall Street especially, will know that we don't particularly like acquisitions. Acquisitions are seen as maybe kind of a last resort, or if a company isn't able to sustain growth from its core business, it has to go out. And Peter Lynch famously called it diversification. And that's these big blockbuster acquisitions or mergers. I would say Teladoc and Livongo is a good example of kind of
Mm.
destroying investor value through this acquisition instead of just focusing on the core business. But there are certain companies that do acquisitions really well. Berkshire Hathaway is an obvious one. I think it's becoming less relevant to this type of business now because I think 50% of the company is Apple, and it doesn't buy as many companies outright anymore. It'll buy big
Mm.
stakes. But Constellation Software is a really good example that's been a huge winner in the markets for the last 20, 30 years. It's one of the best performers. And that goes around, it's a Canadian company and it basically buys smaller software companies. And they're just bolt-on acquisitions. So I think Constellation Software's market cap is up in the 50 billion plus range. But it'll go and buy a Dutch accounting software company for 50 million and just add it on. And it just looks for specific characteristics that add to its own portfolio. And for whatever reason, and I think a lot of the reasons you just said about the Swedish investing culture, there's loads of these companies up in Sweden, and their results are unreal. It's kind of mad
Mm.
to see. So
Mm.
like there'll be very successful companies people might have seen. Lifco is one, Indutrade is another, AdTech is another, that have just performed so well year on year on year. And it's because this formula is there. There's already a prescribed path of success, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So a company will have a mission to buy, we'll say, 5 companies a year or 10 million worth of cash flow this year to achieve a certain growth figure or a certain cash flow figure or a certain operating margin or whatever it is. But it's a very predictable road to success. And I think that's what
Mm.
investors love so much. And then it only
Yeah.
becomes an execution issue because
Yeah.
we've seen the path work already. So we kind of already know it does. So does the management team have the abilities to pull it off? And a lot of them do. So yeah, it's a really interesting part of the market that I'm still exploring and still finding out more and more about. And obviously they aren't all successes, but it's very exciting. And if you could go and look and identify a company, say we talked about Lifco, which has, I'd say, maybe 260 subsidiaries, and then say, all right, well, what has Lifco done well? And then look for a company in the early
Mm.
stages that's trying to do
Mm.
something similar. And the one we identified is Technia, that has 26 companies. Do you know what I mean? And it's got a 20th of the market cap. So if we can just follow the right path and execute on it, we already know that
Yeah.
there's that success waiting for it if it does. So yeah, it is. It's an interesting one. I would describe it as like businesses made by investors for investors, and that feeds into Sweden's
Yeah.
investing culture a lot too. So yeah,
That's right.
there's huge opportunities there, and I think it's a really interesting part of the market and one people wouldn't know about either, which also is why
Yeah.
there could be some gains there. So yeah, that's Swedish serial acquirers. I've been kind
But
of
right, the cohort, the term baby Berkshire has been kicked around for as long as I'm a stock investor. And initially I heard it, I suppose, in relation to Markel, Tom Gaynor's operation, which is next door to Berkshire almost. And then I heard it being applied to other businesses. And we encountered what I would say at least 6 businesses that looked more like a baby Berkshire in Sweden than I have found or observed in America over the last few years. Like Boston Oma has one that could be regarded as a baby Berkshire. I think Warren Buffett's grand nephew runs the operation, and it's a fine business. But if you're going to say what truly looks like a baby Berkshire, what type of company is looking to buy a See's candy, as Berkshire did in the 60s, and turned it into a money-making machine? What other businesses are out there doing that? You're right, we encountered those names, and definitely our new service Nexus highlighted a couple of them for sure. I can't remember which ones off the top of my head, but for sure. Okay, look, Mike, let's move away from Sweden, and we're post Black Friday now, so I think we're okay to mention Christmas, specifically the Santa rally, and it's something we talk about every year.